Welcome, adventurers. Today, we're going to talk about the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Remaster because what else would we be talking about? Now, I'm not on the exclusive early access list, so I'm just catching up to some of these things now, but I have noticed some pretty strong, overarching trends and changes in direction that I do want to talk about. So let's dive in. The first is something that we knew was coming, and that is alignment is now gone. You no longer need to or should worry about whether you're lawful good or chaotic evil or anything like that. I see this as a good change. Personally, myself, with my character building and in my campaigns, it really didn't come up ever, I don't think. And even when I think of podcasts or gameplay that I listen to, alignment is referenced, but it's almost always as a joke, like what alignment is a TV character or what alignment is the player, but not necessarily the character. If you do like having that sort of moral code that your character is bound to, well, a lot of classes and build options still have anathemas, which is good because that's more specific to just your character. And if that's something that you want to do with your character, well, it's available to you. But we no longer have this sort of overarching alignment system that sometimes would, technically speaking, lock you out from taking certain spells or performing certain actions. And it really just always felt more like a hindrance than an actual help to you. So again, if you do like having that sort of moral compass, go with a class that has an anathema. You'll be able to use that sort of cool style of gameplay of, no, my character can't do that or they won't do that. But for everyone else, you can just forget about it. The next thing I want to talk about is how spellcasting got better. It got better in a number of ways, starting with focus spells. Okay, there are two major changes to focus spells that my campaign has already adopted and we've been using since it was sort of announced. We found out about it over the summer. The first is anytime you gain a focus spell, you gain a focus point. That wasn't always the case, but I think it was always intended to be the case. It was sort of just this boilerplate language, and you add a focus point to your focus pool in a lot of focus spells, but wasn't in some, and it felt more like an oversight or an omission than a design. For example, I am playing as a wizard with a champion dedication, and I picked up the Protector's Sacrifice focus spell. Technically speaking, that did not say that I got a focus point. So we played for a long time where I still just had one focus point despite having two focus spells. I am glad to see this now means I get two focus points with my two focus spells. The other thing is that the way you would refocus to regain focus points was super complicated before, where you could have a pool of up to 3 focus points and you could use them all, but then you could only refocus up to another 1 after that. It was kind of chaos, and I, again, don't really think it was by design. I think it was sort of an accident. At least that's the way I saw it. And now it is just so simple. You spend 10 minutes refocusing, and you gain a focus point back, up to your maximum. So if you have 3 focus points, and you use all of them, you cast a focus spell 3 times in an encounter, well, afterwards, you refocus for 10 minutes, you get 1 back. Refocus for 20 minutes, 2. Refocus for 33. It's just that easy. The other thing that is only applicable to casters who sort of archetype as another caster, which happens quite a lot, is that there's now this sort of universal spellcasting proficiency. If you look at the descriptions of your spellcasting classes, it used to say something like trained in arcane spell attacks. Well, now it's just trained in spell attacks. Now, this again really only applies if you picked up an archetype and that archetype is using a different spell list than the one that you currently have. You technically before would have progressed at different levels, and now you don't. This really means that when you do pick up that other archetype, it's not like you have your primary spell list and then just like a secondary one that will lag way behind. You're going to be more or less on equal footing, though your archetype is never going to be your primary source of spellcasting power. And then there are also differences in some individual spells, like Bless and Bane, which are two of your classic buff and debuff spells, well, those have an area of effect, and that area is now bigger. That is super helpful, and I think this sort of is pointing the spellcasters overall into, well, using their spells more efficiently, frankly. It's a little bit more worth it for some of these area of effect, buff, debuff spells. Using your focus points and your focus spells is easier, it's more manageable. I think you will be encouraged to do it more. And on the flip side of all this, there are some, I think, kind of spellcasting nerfs, specifically the fact that your ability modifier is no longer going to contribute to damage with your cantrips. It's a minor math difference that almost works out to be the same average, so maybe it's not that big of a deal, but man, I really do like static, consistent, reliable damage, and you aren't going to get that quite as much with your cantrips. You will be a little bit more of a wild card. So maybe if you are trying to do that blaster caster static damage thing, you really probably want to be a kineticist or a psychic who can unleash psyche and add some damage. Or, if you're a spellcaster, maybe you just lean more into your buffs and debuffs and battlefield control and healing and area of effect spells and all of those things that spellcasters do have the ability to do. And to counter what I kind of just said, let's actually take a look at the math of what this means with something like telekinetic projectile. I love this cantrip. I use it all the time. It has sort of been my go-to with multiple spellcasting characters. So previously it was a d6 plus presumably 4 for your ability modifier. That is a minimum of 5, a max of 10, and an average of 7.5 points of damage. Now it's 2d6, no ability modifier added to it. That's a minimum of only 2. That's kind of a low floor. It does have a max of 12, and the average is 7 compared to the 7.5 earlier. So almost the same. And if you go a little bit further and you compare that to a martial character who might be using a short bow, for example, well, for 2 actions, that martial character could shoot twice, doing a d6 of damage each time. Okay, well, comparing to telekinetic projectile is also going to be 2d6 overall for 2 actions, but it's only 1 attack, which means you aren't incurring the multiple attack penalty on it. That's kind of a good thing, and in a way, I think that means that the caster is going to out-edge that short bow player a little bit in damage. Though the short bow does have the deadly d10 trait, so if it crits, it's going to crit harder. So maybe overall, the math is tight and everything is still really balanced. All right, enough about spellcasting. Let's talk about martials. Now, what I'm noticing with martials, of course we can get into all of the individual feats that have changed, but I don't want to do that. I actually want to talk about some of the general things that have changed that I think are more martial geared, though technically spellcasters could use them too. Disarm is improved. There's a new reposition ability. Swap is a new action. You can put a weapon away and take one out and not spend your whole turn just sort of reconfiguring the weapons you have in hand. And also aid is easier with a default DC of 15 rather than 20. Now, why am I talking about these general things with martials specifically? Because all of those things I just mentioned are things that I have seen martials try to do and fail miserably at, or ask about doing, and then the answer they get is basically, yeah, that is not worth it, or just overall be frustrated or limited that they can't do something like survey the battlefield and switch weapons because it's too costly on the action economy, so they have to charge in. So no, these aren't martial specific abilities, but I think it will affect martials more. And I think what it does is opens up martials into being able to do some of those sort of utility actions a little bit better. Do some debuffs, play with, some teamwork options and not just sort of stand there and smash. All right, so now let's combine spellcasting with martial and talk about Gish changes. This is what I am most excited about. I really like Gish characters, and specifically, I already liked the Warrior Muse Bard and the War Priest Cleric, even though they kind of were much maligned and had some well-earned criticism. These are two subclasses that I do want to talk about specifically because they got big upgrades, and I think they got upgrades in very similar sort of mindsets. The Warrior Muse now has this ability to, extend Courageous Anthem, which is Inspire Courage, with a strike. So you inspire courage, Courageous Anthem, you strike, and then on your next turn, you aren't going to have to spend an action doing that again. There's another rule about it can only be extended once, so I think that means every other turn you're still going to have to do it, but it's still a really cool way that you are making magic happen with a strike. The War Priest is going to have a new feat, I think it's a level 4 feat if I remember, called Restorative Strike, where you heal yourself, make a strike with a status bonus possibly, and then you might be able to heal an ally with it as well. So this is another doing magic with striking. I think these are such cool ideas. It's no longer you technically can do martial abilities and you can spellcast. It's no, you do both at the same time. Also for Cleric overall, but I think more specifically for War Priest this matters, you are just going to get 4 heal or harm spells regardless of what your charisma modifier is. This means that the War Priest who needed wisdom for some of their spellcasting and charisma for their heal spells and strength to do some damage and wear armor, but also a little bit of dexterity because they only had medium armor, which they do get an ability to get heavy armor. This helps them out so much. You can just kind of forget about charisma, and finally you have a build where you're not tied into 4 ability scores and just kind of okay at everything. All right, so those are my impressions of overall changes in game direction with the remaster. You've got that sort of antiquated, in my opinion, alignment that's just sort of removed. Certain parts of spellcasting got way better, certain parts maybe got a little bit worse, arguably, and I think the goal of that is making spellcasters just a little bit more focused on utility, on buffing, on debuffing, on battlefield control, and a little bit less at trying to be blaster casters, frankly, all the time. I'm guilty of that. And then martials do have some more utility options, which I mean is going to make playing a martial character, I think, a little bit more dynamic. And then finally, there are some more true Gish abilities that are not just limited to the Magus. I'm really excited by this direction. I hope it keeps evolving that way. I just love the idea of not alternating between doing martial actions and spellcasting actions, but doing combined actions as, again, more classes than just the Magus. What am I missing? I know there are tons of individual renames and slightly changed feats or new feats and other things like that, but big picture, changes in direction, new ways of thinking about the game. Is there anything else I'm missing? Let me know about it in the comments. Until then, remember that with clerics no longer relying on charisma for their heal spells, your party's healer can now completely lack any semblance of bedside manner, just like the doctors you deal with in real life.